Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our Engaging and Managing Employees to Increase Productivity in the New Normal webinar. My name is Teresa, and I will be your tech support and organizer for this webinar. Our presenters today are Jessica Elly, Program Coordinator and Associate Consultant with the FSBDC at UCF in Orlando, Monica Williams, Area Manager and Consultant for the FSBDC at Seminole State College, and Elly Membreno, Consultant with FSBDC at UCF in Kissimmee. Before we get started, I do need to cover a few housekeeping rules. Your mics are muted by default. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the questions chat box feature in the GoToWebinar panel at any time. We will address them as we go through the presentation. We ask that you make your question as specific as you can so we can answer it accordingly. Please do not use the raise the hand feature. We can only take questions and comments through the question box. Copies of today's presentation and other handouts Jessica and Elly and Monica will have are in the handouts tab on the GoToWebinar panel. Evaluation survey for this webinar will be emailed to you shortly after this session, so please check your inbox at the conclusion and submit your feedback as soon as possible. So just a little bit about the SBDC before we start the presentation. The SBDC, or Small Business Development Center at UCF, is an economic development organization that exists to help small businesses grow and succeed. And we serve an 8-county region. We are state designated as Florida's principal provider of business assistance and are partially funded by the US SBA, the state of Florida, and other local support organizations and community partners. The SBDC has been around for 45 years, and we have offices throughout Florida, ranging from our headquarters in Pensacola all the way down to the Keys, with each region being hosted by a university or state college. In Central Florida, we are hosted by UCF. Our service offerings include no cost, one-on-one consulting in all different aspects of business, and normally in-person and now virtual seminars on various business topics and strategies. For the recordings that we've done previously for this particular series, this is the third. The rest are also now published on our YouTube page or on SBDC Orlando's website. That's www.sbdcorlando.com, and you'll be able to look on the webinars, and that's where you can find all of the webinars that we've recorded so far this year. So again, thank you for joining us, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. As she mentioned, I'm very honored and excited to be here with my colleagues, Monica Williams with the SBDC at Seminole State College and Elly Membreno with the FSBDC at UCF. Bit of a disclaimer here this morning. So, of course, this presentation is intended for general information purposes only. Individual situations and circumstances, of course, can be very complex and diverse. And if you have any specific questions, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney who could be able to advise and assist you with your particular circumstances. This is, again, not intended to be legal advice. This is best practices and general information purposes. So with that, today's agenda this morning is twofold. We want to talk about managing teams, managing employees, and we're going to talk about that in a few different ways. So whether your team is, in a bit of a hybrid environment, whether they're entirely remote, or whether everyone's back in the office, there's different best practices and things we want to talk with you this morning about better engaging and managing for increased productivity. We want to talk a little bit about some HR compliance, better collaboration as a team, and we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of work-life balance and what that means and why it's so important and how we can better support ourselves and support others. Before we dig into today's content, I'd like to take a quick poll. So what does your organization look like today? So are some of your team remote and some are back in the office? Is everyone still remote? Is everyone back in the office? Or perhaps maybe you guys even never left the office? Or is it a bit of a hybrid mix? Or you have people are working remotely some days and back in the office others? What do you guys all look like today? Give everyone a moment to answer.
Hey, Jessica, I want to apologize. For some reason, the poll feature isn't working right now. So if we can move on real quick, and I will stop you and let you know when the poll does start working. I'm so sorry. This
No, no
hasn't really
problem,
happened.
no problem
Sorry.
whatsoever. And that is no problem because regardless, we're talking about employee engagement. So no matter what your team looks like today, um, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can better engage them and why it is so important that we do engage them. So Gallup actually just released this statistic recently that 36% of US employees feel engaged in their work and in their organization. Does that number surprise any of you? I know it surprised me. It doesn't seem like a very high number. And so one thing for sure is there's a lot of work that we can do to better engage and motivate our workforce. And we know that a more engaged workforce is going to be more productive. They're going to be more efficient. They're going to be more creative and motivated. And they're also going to be more likely to stay with their organization for longer, which ultimately all of that is going to make the business more profitable. And that's our goal, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So with that, I'm going to pass to my colleague, Ms. Monica, to talk a little bit about hybrid team environments.
Awesome, thank you. So when we're thinking about hybrid team environments and how do we manage in these teams, one of the things I'd like to start with in terms of giving out tips and suggestions is less tactical and more of a strategy. And not to get too theoretical, but everything that we create, we first create in the mind or as a thought. So the start of managing a team in a hybrid environment and thinking about, when you see some of the lists of common challenges, is how do we stay in touch? How do we keep everyone engaged? Is everyone as productive as they should be? Are they doing their job, right? So when we're thinking about this, I think about what are we trying to create in our mind and in our thoughts. And so the start of being able to manage this in this new environment has to do with mindset. So when we're looking at mindset, most of us are going to have to take sort of a mindset shift. And so changing to becoming curious and flexible and remaining open to how do we do this. And we just watched Jessica do a wonderful job of being flexible. So she had an agenda. We were going to do a poll first, and then she's like, "No, it's okay. We have to pivot. We have to do something different." That's just how it goes in these new environments that we're in. So if you're used to having very rigid standards or even rigid outcomes, sometimes we just have to be flexible about the way that it looks. So the mantra you can tell yourself is different is not better or worse. Different is just different. So I think that that's a big thing to just start believing to be true. Different is just different. It is not inherently better or worse than it was before. It is simply different than what we're used to. And then I think it's also important to accept that it is, in fact, a challenge. That you are given a challenge right now in the situation, that COVID has provided us an opportunity and also a challenge. And I think if you can accept that it is going to be a challenge, as opposed to fighting the fact that it's happening, then it actually makes it easier. And the last thing that I think is so important in terms of the mindset shift is that no one has all the answers. You can attend all the webinars, you can read about all the things in Gallup and Harvard Business Review and all the different places that people have suggestions and advice, and they're doing a lot of research really quickly to try to figure out who's doing this well and how are they doing it if they are doing it well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I think it's so important to keep in mind that you, as the leader, the manager of the organization, you don't have to have all the answers. And I think it's a really wonderful thing to do, especially in smaller teams and smaller organizations when you don't have hundreds of employees where you have to have everything figured out, because it would be crippling to your business if you didn't. I think it's wonderful for you to admit that you are in process, that you are trying to figure it out. And that actually pulls in your teammates to do, some of this figuring it out with you. I think a lot about when I think about mindset shift, there was this TED Talk, it was called Build a Tower, Build a Team. And I think it was very popular. So I don't know how much we're gonna go into it today, but essentially what they did is they gave teams a task of building a tower with like very simple supplies, toothpicks and marshmallows. And there was a challenge in there. You can't have it topple over, but you want to get it as high as you possibly could get it. And they tested with a whole bunch of different groups, from MBA students and top of their class and law students, and they put them in teams. And they also did kindergartners, and they watched to see who did the best job. And it's hilarious, but every single time, kindergartners outperformed everyone else. And I think it has to do, well, they talk in the TED Talk, is it has to do with the fact that they do not have the same power structure adults have, but they also have this flexibility in mind. So that's mindset shift. It's being flexible, it's being open. And so that is the key. So that's the start. The next is, I would still stay in the place of the mind, and it's mindfulness. And mindfulness is one of those concepts that we sort of hear all over the place all the time now. It's on everything, but probably for a good reason. And so mindfulness is simply this, especially when we're talking about mindfulness in business. It's the practice of having awareness of yourself and of others. So again, if you're managing teams, it's being able to see when you feel out of balance and not taking action or behaving when you're out of balance, but calming back down, making sure you don't feel overwhelmed or that you're not burnt out. It's the same thing for recognizing that in someone else. And so making sure you're not asking or pushing for the same outcomes that you were prior to, because again, we don't know if this team can handle that. So you're always just trying to be mindful or aware of what's going on. So those are kind of the first steps when we're thinking about how do we manage, how do we do a good job with this new environment, whether everyone's virtual or some combination of virtual and in person. So then the tactical steps are to have one of our favorite tools when we're talking about managing teams is meetings. So there are two types of meetings that we're going to talk about. First are the team meetings. And the best practices for holding hybrid team meetings, and a lot of research was sort of, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of quick research was done to see how is this going and how do we get people to participate and in what ways are they working together. And one of the best things that I read in the literature was that there is a request for participation in advance. And when you do that, it causes so much more engagement. So a request for participation in advance is to ask somebody to run part of the meeting, to present on a topic, to hold a part of the responsibility for conducting what's going on. So that's something you want to do in advance so that they can prepare for it. And then the other thing that I thought was really unique that a lot of teams are doing successfully is creating chat rooms that allow for what I'm terming virtual water cooler moments. And so in teams of, I think, maybe 20 or more, it kind of works better when you schedule and you can pick names out of a hat and pair 2 or 3 people together to have a virtual lunch break or a virtual water cooler moment where they can just catch up, because they're not doing that anymore. And that's part of what's missing. It's creating those opportunities in team meetings, whether it's sort of like we're going to take a break in the beginning or in the middle, or do something in the beginning while everybody's sort of filtering in. We're just going to chat for a few, and you put them in rooms, and maybe you give them a topic to talk about, or maybe you don't. And those seem to be really, really popular with hybrid teams. And so I just wanted to mention that when you're thinking about doing team meetings as a tool to help your teams stay engaged and productive. And then the last thing that I was going to speak about was the individual meetings. And so we did a whole entire presentation on the power of individual meetings. But when you're doing individual meetings, they don't need to be very long. But the important part of them is that you set clear expectations. And so when we think about what's going on in these meetings is so important. And again, in the literature, it talks about the outcome and bottom line. So not how I did it, but that I got it done and it's the way you wanted it done, is the focus of the two major or the largest groups, generational groups we have in the workplace right now. So both Gen Z and millennials favor this approach. They don't really want you tracking how much time they're working or when they're working, or are they working from 9 to 5. Instead, they want to be outcome driven, bottom line focused. And so if you can say with clear expectations, this is what I'm looking for, and then leave it to them to do it whenever they get it done, it's actually increasing engagement and productivity because they are just able to get their work done. So in order for you to be able to do that, to give them a bottom line, to give them a goal and let them get it done, that means you do have to communicate regularly. You don't want to micromanage, but in order to do that effectively, you're going to have regular meetings, clear communication, and clear expectations. So when you're thinking about you're doing all this talking, you're setting up the meetings, you're doing the requesting, you're making all the demands, it's so important, again, for productivity, for engagement, for people's well-being, for them to be able to give you feedback. And it's often really intimidating to give direct verbal feedback to a supervisor. So one of the things, again, that you'll find to be a helpful tool is to ask for written feedback. And so if you're going to have an individual meeting and this is going to be a virtual meeting, you could preempt the meeting with, can you please fill out this, piece of paper with these questions on it and send it back over to me? Or at the end of the meeting, once you've listened to them discuss what's going on and you're very clear about the bottom line and this is what we're going to do and when I expect it from you, you can ask those questions. Can you please make sure you outline so I'm clear on what's going on? And so not asking so directly and giving them a chance to reflect and do it in writing is also a very helpful tool. So those are your tactics and tools for running your meetings.
Thank you, Monica. That's awesome. That's really, really helpful and a lot of really good points that you made there. Actually, I'm going to pass it to Miss Elly to bring us into the remote workers world.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Monica. All the tips and tactics that you're providing goes along with my topic as well. So managing remote workers. So it's important, as Monica is saying, set clear expectations. You hiring somebody because he has a lot of experience doing the same thing that they will doing in your job and your work and your company. So make sure that they know what you expect from them. Set realistic goals, set priorities and milestones, and always follow their performance. Another tip is be flexible. Working from home has different demands on time. For some people and some employees, working early in the morning is more productive. For others, it's late in the evening. Shorten virtual meetings. People have shorter attention spans in virtual meetings, so focus on the topic, and that way you will get more productive results. Track your workers' progress. Ask employees to give you their work schedule and tasks to accomplish within a given time, but don't oversee them. If you oversight what they're doing, you can show signs of mistrust. Emphasize communication. Stay in frequent contact with remote staff to keep workers appraised of deadlines, available resources, work-related challenges, and manager expectations. For example, setting up morning meetings or weekly meetings will be very helpful. Let them know that you're not top of them, but you're available. And determine which communication tool is best for your team. It could be email or text or phone calls, video chats, or intranet channels. Find a balance between radio silence and constantly pinging employees, texting, and email. Remember to listen. Communication is a two-way street. The most successful managers are good listeners. Communicate trust and respect. Inquire about workload and progress without micromanaging. Building connections. It's not enough to provide workers with proper equipment to work from home. They also need human interaction. So share positive feedback, open phone channel to talk, grab coffee together to maintain the sense of normality. Make managers available to the team and have always open door policies. Provide a way to collaborate. Create a shared document that tracks work's activities. And agree with a team on acceptable virtual collaboration behavior. Resist to urge of to micromanage. Trust that if your team knows in advance meeting goals and deadlines, they will be productive and they will do their best possible. And celebrate success. Look for opportunities to celebrate work milestones, just as you would do it in the office. And so with that, we're going to talk about tough conversations remotely. You know that we sometimes have to address these very uncomfortable conversations, and sometimes we try to avoid them because we don't want to create that environment in our office. But you have to face it, and that a good tip that I could give you today is build trust with your employees, and that starts in the interview process, then in the onboarding process. You start building that trust. If the employees feel that they can trust you, they will know that that you have good intentions, and they will be more open to tell you what is going on. Avoid confrontations on legal issues if you're not prepared. So prior ahead, talk to you lawyer or your HR professional. Let them know that you have that situation, so they can advise you how to confront that situation. Focus on job-related consequences. Don't bring personal issues on this conversation. Allow the employees to come up with possible solutions, so that will be, a good way to accomplish, what you want. So solve the problem. Show sensitivity and be empathetic. And these times we need to be more flexible and follow up all the time. So if it's good or bad, you have to follow up so that way you move forward. And my last part of the presentation is something that I really love to bring in every opportunity that we have. And that is, don't forget about HR compliance. Sometimes we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And some others we don't want to see, what it's there. But you have to be in charge of the information. So either if you're referring to employees working from office or remotely, we should comply. So do you know about the HR laws and guidelines referring to your industry? Based on different industries, we should be aware of the guidelines and laws about it. Do you comply with the legal posters requirement? Do you know that those legal posters has to be in place where if you're in your office where the employees are more in a common area? And do you know if you have remote employees, you should comply by sending those posters on, by email and let them know that they should read it and talk about it. Do you provide a copy of your handbook, employee handbook to your employees? Do you have an employee handbook? The FSBDC can help you and guide you. We can give you a template and we can work with you part of the customizing the document. Do you classify your employees and 1099s correctly? You know that this classification is not up to us. The IRS has the classification, the legal classification. So understand which, what are the conditions for each classification is important. So that way you don't have a liability in the future. Do you have cybersecurity policies in place? For example, do you provide equipment to your employees, laptops, tablets? Do you run antivirus on your equipment? What about the passwords? Do you have an admin password for that equipment? So that way you can have access to, to that equipment. What about public Wi-Fi's? You know that we as a consultants and SBDC, and working for UCF, we're not allowed to open our computers and connect to any Wi-Fi, a public Wi-Fi. And so be careful with that. There's a lot of people out there that they're experts in stealing that information from public Wi-Fi's. What about the equipment? Do you ask them how to treat the equipment? If they're taking the computer home and they go to run errands and on their way and they're leaving the equipment in the car. So do you have any policy about that? About, exploring different sites in internet while in your equipment or while they're working? What about backups? Do they have your clients' information? Are they, doing backups? Do you teach them how to do backups? So all that is so important. So be aware of that. We have a consultant can guide you and to create these policies. And what about the CDC guidelines? Do you follow those based on your industry? And worker compensation insurance, it applies to you? Do you have one employee, 4 employees? Are you in the construction industry? So I know it's a lot of information at once, but we're here to let you know that FSBDC is here to help you, and we are, as a team with Teresa, Monica, Jessica, and I will here to help you and guide you in the HR area of your business. So with that, pass to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Elly. Yeah, really important stuff. Really great information and great questions that you asked. And of course, the SBDC is absolutely here to help you navigate any of these topics. So you maybe noticed when some of these topics that we've been thinking about, regardless of what your team looks like in terms of remote or back in the office or hybrid, there are a lot of best practices that you can implement to maintain accountability and enhance communication and foster creativity and collaboration. There's a lot of things that you can do regardless of how your team is formatted at this point to really make them more productive and therefore more profitable. So let's talk a little bit about that. So one of the things I want to think about when I talk about teams, I'm not necessarily meaning if your organization is split up into different teams or departments, and perhaps they are, or maybe you're a staff of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Regardless, your organization is a team, and whether a person, regardless of their position, whatever role they're in, each employee is a contributing member to your organization, to the team. And as small business owners, it's crucial that we take steps to empower not only ourselves, but others to be successful in their roles and as part of our organization. That's how we further our goals and mission and vision. So this really circles back to motivation and engagement, which cultivates better productivity and ultimately improves profits. So there's several things to think about when it comes to collaborating as a team. And it all starts with clear communication. Monica and Elly have talked about this, and they've talked about having goals in place and how essential that is. But people need to know what are the expectations for what needs to be done and how it will be done. You've probably heard of a concept called SMART goals, and those are really important. Goals that are specific and measurable, achievable, realistic, that are time sensitive. How do we measure success? People need to know that. They want to know that they're doing well. They need to know what the goals for their team, what the goals for the organization, the goals for their department or their team. It's really important to have that communicated from the beginning so that everyone is on the same page and working to the same things. We've talked about celebrating wins. That's huge when it comes to motivation and to recognition and morale, and which leads to greater productivity is celebrating those key milestones. Even smaller milestones along the way towards larger goals can be really motivating. And listening. don't underestimate the power of just listening, active listening, and being open to new ideas. And that's really going to lead to increased morale and better creativity. It's not necessarily that every single idea that someone's going to put forward is necessarily a good idea or is implementable, but if employees feel like there is opportunity for them to really voice their opinions and suggestions and concerns and ideas and thoughts constructively, that's going to make them feel a lot more valued and respected and engaged. And they're going to feel heard, which we can't underestimate the power of that. So ask yourself, do your employees know who to reach out to with certain questions? Do they know where to go with particular questions that they may have? Is everyone's role clearly defined and understood so that each person can actually do their position, do their role well? And do they know how that job, that position contributes to the overall organization? People want to feel like they're contributing and that their role, their job matters and is contributing to the business's growth and where it's going. So does each person have specific duties and goals that are tied with those and tasks that they and their supervisor can measure themselves and their effectiveness? Are there appropriate tools for collaboration in place? Are people communicating effectively? Are there checks and balances that allow for accountability and just continuous improvement in general? This really all comes back to performance management and the fact that every team, every individual should have goals in place. We should also ask ourselves, are we playing to people's strengths? And I want to talk a little bit about one of the tools that the SBDC offers that really looks into strengths and weaknesses and dynamics of a team. And I love this approach because it doesn't come from the perspective of is a person, right or wrong in the way that they act or approach things or think. It's really an assessment that really helps uncovers what a person really brings to the table, the strengths that they can bring and how they like to contribute and how they like to communicate. And really how this is a really neat assessment that can lead to better job satisfaction and engagement and better understanding of again, what people bring to the table, where they thrive the most, which leads to better profits, which leads to better communication. And this tool even dives into how can we be, communicate better and efficiently. It can even assist with finding the right hires and making sure that people are satisfied in the positions that they have. And you'll see here several really great results that can come from that, like reduced turnover, which is important, especially when you're a small business, and reduce conflict and stress. The more we can do to reduce stress, the better. So I just wanted to stop and pause about this tool. I think it'd be really helpful if you're interested in how this might be beneficial to you and your organization. Certainly feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to discuss with you. If any of our attendees listening today were able to attend a recent SBDC webinar that we did about leadership and developing others as leaders, that was led by myself and my colleague Sharon Smith. You may remember this really cool, simple, handy tool that we talked about that you'll see here. It's very customizable. It's called the one-on-one check-in. This is a really great way to guide conversation and give feedback and discuss progress in not only a clear but a meaningful way. So what you see here will be included as a handout that you can download today. And it's a great way for a supervisor and employee to connect on key issues, celebrate wins, keep the lines of communication open, and ensure that expectations are really clear. And what you'll see here, this is meant to act as an agenda, and it should be completed actually by the employee because it's meant to empower him or her and is a helpful way to make sure that their voice is heard and that everyone is on the same page. I really love this tool because it starts out with a very positive, celebrating wins, accomplishments to celebrate, and that sets a great tone for the conversation. And then it talks about open issues, it talks about current projects, outstanding issues. I like that it asks, what help is needed from the supervisor, what other topics might we need to discuss. And it ends with really specific follow-up and action items, whether they're for the supervisor or the employee, and that helps maintain momentum. So obviously you can see how customizable this agenda can really be. And the other neat thing about it is you can decide how often a conversation like this should take place. Should the employee, should this be a conversation that happens once a week? Maybe every Monday morning or Friday afternoon? Is every other week or once a month or even once a quarter sufficient? But I think this is a really great guideline for those check-in conversations. And Monica talked about the powers of those individual meetings that we can't Can't underestimate that. And again, obviously the cool thing about this as well is whether this conversation takes place virtually or in person, it's obviously still going to be effective and productive. So I think that this could be a really cool tool if you don't have something like this that you're already using. I think we can't underestimate the power of these check-in conversations. So with that, I'd like to shift to a little bit about work-life balance. This is something you've probably thought of or spoken about quite a bit, especially given the events of the past year and a half or so. But how intentional are we actually about ensuring that we and our teams maintain an actual healthy level of work-life balance? Do we really actually disconnect when we're supposed to? And do our team feel like they can actually do the same? Do we really have the liberty to step back outside of working hours? It's important not to underestimate the significance of breaks and time it takes to recharge and allowing separate spaces for our personal and professional lives. And of course, for some, that's much easier than others. For small business owners, the line between work and other parts of life can blend together very easily. And work-life balance, can sound great, and it can sound maybe even simple to implement in theory, but in practice, there are many who find this challenging, whether they're in the office or remotely or some sort of hybrid format. So let's take a little bit closer look at this and why it matters. Before we do that, I'm going to try a poll one more time, Teresa, so maybe we can see if it'll work this time. But if possible, I'd like to see, do you feel like you personally have a healthy work-life balance? Is it a priority for you? Is it only some or part of the time maybe? Is this something that you even feel like is possible for you? Maybe you're listening to this and saying, okay, Jessica, sure, work-life balance sounds great, but that's just not in the cards for me right now. There's way too much going on. I'd like to do a quick pulse check and get your thoughts on your own personal level of work-life balance. And while we're doing that, as I talk about this topic, if you have any great little quick tips that you've done that you feel like have helped you achieve work-life balance, there are little things that you do that have worked for you. I'd love to hear from you. If you don't mind sharing those in the chat box, I'd love to hear some of those if you have anything that's worked for you in the past to help with this. Give everybody a quick second. Teresa, whenever you're ready, so am I. Give everyone a moment.
All right, we got about 5 more seconds.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, I'm going to close the poll. And here are your results.
Wow, I am very glad to see that some folks have at least said some of the time, seen quite a few most of the time. And I'm glad to see that it's a priority. And it looks like about 20% of us said, you know what, not really. I really need to focus on this more. I find it interesting, and I'm glad to see that people don't seem to think it's impossible for them. So that's good to see. Thank you guys.
We do actually have a comment.
Oh, great.
One person tries to go for a walk or meditate a ride on a meditative ride on their stationary bike.
Excellent. I love that idea. That can be a really good way to unwind and decompress. That's fantastic. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for sharing that. So let's start with a little bit of the impact of poor work-life balance. So I was reading this Forbes article that came out recently, and so y'all are familiar with Indeed. They did a survey, and they actually found that, Indeed did a survey of 1,500 workers, and they had different levels of experience. They were from different industries, age groups, and the survey was done to determine burnout levels. And the cool thing about this was they actually had also done a survey in January 2020, so pre-COVID. So they took their results post-COVID, if you will, and compared them with pre-COVID, and they found some really interesting things. So turns out that burnout is definitely increasing. 52%, over half of the respondents indicated that they are feeling burned out. And I won't say only 43, but that was up from 43% back in January 2020. And actually 80% of these respondents did say that they feel like COVID has affected burnout. And 67% of that 80% said that it was not positively, that COVID had a negative effect on burnout. It was increasing that stress and those burnout feelings. So There's also a great article from Mayo Clinic. And again, you'll see these resources and links in the back of the presentation if you're interested. Mayo Clinic also had an article that talked about the impact of poor life balance and of burnout, and that if you're too, married, quote unquote, to your work, that can lead to increased fatigue, which can result in poorer productivity and effectiveness as a result. So we know when we're tired, our thinking becomes cloudier, it's easier to make mistakes. Stress can be a really common result of poor work-life balance, of course, and that can take a toll on our health in numerous ways. So, and there's obviously implications for our personal lives as well. So while this might seem really obvious, I'm sure none of this is shocking to you guys. We shouldn't underestimate the impact that this can have on our health and relationships and quality of life in general. So how do we start to approach this? It starts with yourself. You've probably heard the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's essential to recharge and disconnect at the right times and to take regular care of ourselves. If we don't take the time to do so, it becomes much more challenging to effectively work and lead and accomplish any of the personal, professional tasks or goals that we have for ourselves. So as small business owners and leaders in our organization, it's up to us to set the tone and example for others. So where do we begin? How can we really make an effort? And it starts by knowing when to say no. There are many reasons we may not want to say no when we're asked for something. Maybe, we feel an obligation to say yes because we don't want to let down the person who's asking, or we don't want to miss out on a potential opportunity, especially if we're growing a business. Or maybe we just don't feel like we can't handle something else on our plate. Or maybe it's a combination of these reasons or something else altogether. Whatever it might be, it's critical to be mindful of when we're able to actually say yes and when we can't, and to give ourselves and others permission to say, I just can't take this on right now. When we're trying to grow a business, that can be really difficult. But to protect our reputation and our mental health, we need to be mindful of our capacity and what's realistic to actually accomplish. It's great to have stretch goals, don't get me wrong. It's good to challenge ourselves, but we also need to know when we've truly reached our limits and maxed out our resources. Also, are we divvying up our time effectively? We can tell ourselves this is the hour I'll work and this is the hour I'll have lunch, for example, but do we actually follow through? How can we avoid distractions when we're supposed to focus on work? And how can we avoid being resented to respond to that work email or request when we're supposed to be disconnected? Actually intentionally scheduling breaks and respecting our own boundaries we're trying to set for ourselves can be very helpful. If you have allocated specific times where you say, okay, this will be my working time and this will be when I'm off the clock. And when whether you're working from home or not, do you have a workspace that's free of distractions so that you can really be productive? But that's also a space you can walk away from when your workday is done. Is your workspace laid out to your benefit? And same, think about your remote workers too. Do they have the tools they need to succeed remotely? If they're hybrid, are things streamlined for efficiency and ease of use so they're not losing a lot of efficiency when they're back and forth between the office and their remote location? There are a lot of tools out there and resources to assist with communication and organization and collaboration. So, I asked you guys to think about, is there something else you could implement to really improve how you operate? Something else to consider, it's really important to prioritize and reprioritize your goals and your obligations, whether they're personal or professional, so you can better address your most pressing needs and opportunities and next steps. So Harvard Business Review had a really good article earlier this year that discussed the importance of reprioritizing as part of work-life balance. So it's an effort that doesn't really ever end. You have to be consistent. So in order to remain focused and organized on what matters to you the most, you have to understand that might change and fluctuate from week to week, of course. Our circumstances are always changing. So your priorities one week or one day may be different the next week or different the next quarter. So being mindful of that and consistently prioritizing and reprioritizing can help you be more productive and flexible and more focused on what you really need to be addressing in that moment. And I'd also like to emphasize the importance of minimalizing perfectionism and knowing when to give yourself and your team members some extra grace and understanding. The pandemic's brought with it a lot of challenges and opportunities and emotions and transitions to the forefront in a lot of unexpected ways. So it's important to recognize the appropriate times when we may need to give ourselves a little bit of slack and others as we continue to adjust and move forward. So we know that engaged and motivated employees are more productive, more effective, and willing to stay longer with their organization. So as leaders, while we're working on our own work-life balance, how can we ensure that others are doing the same? So ask yourself, would flexible hours be helpful? There might be some instances where maybe hours can be adjusted for your team so that they can do their job effectively, maybe even more effectively. But it still allows them to maybe go take care of that family member or go to a doctor's appointment or attend a family event or pick up their child from daycare, whatever it might be. But maybe there's some opportunity for a little bit of flexibility, and people really appreciate that. Are you noticing burnout? So maybe a lack of motivation, increase in issues and mistakes, or maybe even a total change in attitude, especially in high performers. If you're seeing someone who's normally so positive and they're suddenly, maybe step back a little bit and seeming more discouraged, when you notice stuff like that, it's important to address in a positive and constructive way as soon as possible. Is your company culture reflecting what you hope it does? Are you being a good example? Are you giving some space for yourself for work-life balance? If they're not seeing you as their leader do that, it's much harder for some folks to justify doing that for themselves. Does your team have the tools they need? One of the best ways to find out, even though we may think we know, and perhaps maybe they do have all the tools they need, the best way to find out is simply to ask, hey, is there anything that you need that would make your job easier or quicker or more efficient or more accurate or whatever it might be? But making sure that people have the tools to be successful is obviously going to make them more productive, more efficient. Are there good practices and communication in place if someone's out of the office so that the business doesn't skip a beat when someone is out? Are we recognizing and rewarding hard work appropriately? And do my employees really feel appreciated? So we can't underestimate the importance of recognizing and rewarding hard work. We've talked about celebrating wins, celebrating small milestones. Don't underestimate that. And we also want to give that recognition in ways that the employee is really going to value it. So for example, someone might really appreciate being publicly called out in a staff meeting, if you will. So maybe in a staff meeting or meeting with others, you say, wow, so-and-so did a really amazing job. They really came through with X, Y, and Z and met this deadline or really helped this client or customer in this way and really came through and just thank you so much. That was excellent. Some people might really love that opportunity to kind of shine for a moment, whereas there might be others who might completely be embarrassed by that. Even that positive attention drawn to them might make them feel a little bit awkward, a little shy, if you will. And they might much more appreciate maybe a handwritten note or even an email or just simply coming to their desk to say, hey, I saw that you did that and it made a big difference and thank you so much. And especially if your team is entirely remote, it's even more important to over communicate and to do things like that so that even your remote workers still feel seen and they still know, wow, the things that I'm doing are being noticed. So in asking ourselves these questions, we can start to pick up on opportunities to better support our team. All right, I'd like to do one more poll. Talked about quite a few different things today. And I'm just curious, where do you feel like you could most benefit from addressing? And you can check any and all that might apply. So is it revisiting your company's culture and values a little bit? Is it, man, I really wish I could find some ways to improve communication or collaboration? Is it work-life balance for yourself and others? Do you feel like your HR policies and procedures and operations are really meeting your needs and requirements? I'd like to do a quick pulse check and see what has stood out the most to you this morning.
We have about 20 seconds left, so if you guys can go ahead and check all the ones that apply.
Yes, thank you very much. And we are about to move into our Q&A section. So if there's any questions or thoughts that you'd like to share or questions you'd like to ask to Elly and Monica and I, please feel free to share those in the chat box and we'll make sure that we get to those.
We do actually have a comment I can share right now. One of our attendees has found that exercising, going to the gym before the work day starts is beneficial in two ways. They are energized and focused, and they can make sure that they take care of themselves first so that they can take care of others throughout the day. Also, this is key for intermittent fasting and for better weight loss for them. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Sorry.
kind of a little bit of an even split here. Look at that, Elly and Monica, our work's cut out for us. Well, of course, the SBDC would be happy to have these kinds of conversations with you if we can assist you in any way as you start thinking about these topics and try to implement some of these things in your own life and in your own organization. If you already have an SBDC consultant, certainly feel free to follow up with them. We'll send you some follow-up. Our survey is very important to us. So as Teresa said, you'll be receiving a survey and you'll get an email from us helping you connect with the SBDC if you're not already connected. So we'd love to chat with you more about these different topics and how we might be able to assist you. Did we get any other questions by chance at this point, Ms. Teresa?
We did. One of our attendees is in a hybrid group that works partially virtually, and they have some communication issues. What do you suggest?
That's a great question. Well, first I would start with looking at how you're collaborating. So, Elly kind of talked about this a little bit too. There are a number of ways to communicate through virtual meetings, through chats, and through whether even text messages, emails, and things like that. So I would take a look at, are there some tools that you could implement just to kind of, she talked about even shared documents and those kinds of things. So how you can safely and securely set up those kinds of tools so that you can better collaborate and communicate. But maybe a good starting point for you too is to specifically carve out some time, whether it's once a week or every other week or whatever works for you, to have those conversations, team conversations, and those individual meetings. It sounds maybe simplistic in some ways to like, oh, more meetings, who has time for that? Or, but that can be a really good way to have that pulse check and just to get in front of one another and with a specific agenda to say, where are we going, where have we been, both on an individual and on a team or an organization level can be really helpful. Anything you'd add to that, Elly and Monica?
Yes, I would like to add that it's normal when we have a distance between people, or normally, not saying even at work environment, the relationship is not as close as where we meet every day. So the engagement, it's cold. So take that in consideration. So try to get one-on-one if you're a supervisor, so with your employees, to understand what are their feelings, why they consider out of place, what are their solutions, and what is going on. Try to be aware of both positions. If it's a conflict there, try to listen both positions, try to be neutral, and have also a group meeting where we can address that situation, bring feedback to the team, and also try to get opportunities for engagement at least once a month. Bring dynamics, thought out of the box. For example, there were dynamic the other day from one of our clients that they set up an hour of engagement a Saturday in the afternoon. So the owner, what she did is send puzzles, the same puzzle to each employee to deliver by mail. And chocolate or Coca-Cola, I don't know what else was for snack. And then in that hour, they were doing the puzzle, each one at the same time. So at the end, they got the result, they have prizes, and it helps a lot to build the teamwork. So have that in consideration could be useful. And we can chat you all the time, one-on-one.
Absolutely. That's great.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. Flex work schedules make sense, but do you have any insight as to how they can manage consistently so it doesn't turn into a bigger problem than it is a benefit?
I consider that flexibility, it's not easy to manage. I understand that, but you know, if we will have employees that are getting into the labor environment with that culture in mind, we have to be flexible and we have to understand that. So how can I address that if it's difficult to manage and follow up? I would say, you know, with Monica and Jessica, we were talking about set up expectations, goals, you know, smart goals, and they know what to do, and they have a time frame how to when to achieve it, and they have the tools to do it. So you say, you know, you're in charge of that. Your schedule will be from that time to this time. But at the end, what I need from you is to get this goal. And I will be reviewing this with you every week. So if you have a challenge, we can address that, but I need you to complete this duty by this time. So micromanage, it's you know, it's not good. So you have to contain yourself and set up those goals and follow up with those priorities, and results will help you to come up with this hard, you know, new environment.
Oh, sorry, Monica, you're muted, I think. Can't hear you, sorry.
Spoken in a while. So I was curious if the person that asked that question would like to kind of expound upon it a little bit more, because in hearing it, thinking of the challenge with the flexible schedule is managing the changes with that flex schedule. And then I sort of assumed that maybe it was just managing the outcome and the results. But I don't know if you can clarify, because there's probably some different advice we might give there. But I totally agree with Elly, and a lot of the solutions to the challenges of managing for me come with the system. So I try to put systems in place as the management tool, so that I am not doing, and Elly used one of the worst, you know, she explained one of the worst things you can do is micromanage. It's one of the worst words you can say, right? Nobody wants to be micromanaged. Nobody wants to hear that they are a micromanager. And the solution to not being that person is the system. So one of the simplest systems is to just, and I think Elly said it beautifully, is just to have regular scheduled meetings and to be outcome focused. And so it does sort of go back to what we were talking about. If I'm assuming your challenge is on that sort of how do I manage the changes in the flexibility of the schedule, then some of it has to do with you know, setting clear expectations, being able to look at the outcome at the end of the day, and then also on ourselves is kind of, are we being flexible? Are we accepting that it looks different? We might be getting exactly what we want, but it might look differently. So those are some of my thoughts. But again, the nuances of what you have and what you're struggling with, we're happy to sort of talk with you after, or work with you if there's something we can help you with.
Thank you. Yeah, very much. I mean, I think it boils down to communication, keeping those lines of communications open on expectations and goals, over communicating almost in a lot of ways as you're managing with that system that Monica and Elly talked about. Sorry, Teresa, I think I cut you off.
Nope, I was just going to start my next question, but you had an answer for that one, so. Are you ready for the next one?
Sure.
Okay. What is the best way to build the workforce for a new company that is just starting out?
Great question. Well, yeah, Elly, I'll pass it to you. Absolutely.
Could you repeat the question again? I don't want to misunderstand.
Okay, of course. What is the best way to build the workforce for a new company that is just starting out?
So I got it right. So we'll say that you should start with your own company values, mission, vision, and core values. That's the priority. So you understand what you want from your company. So you then show your new employees your culture, and they have to go along with that. Also, have all the regulation that we have spoken, all the webinars, your job description, your employee manual, and starting with the interview process, engagement, and also the onboarding process. That is very helpful. We have a lot of tools to help you start your staff, and also your HR. Even if you're a small company with 3 to 4 employees, we can guide you from zero, how to build that from ground zero, and we have the resources to give you, so you can start with a good a good beginning, good startup. Yeah.
Absolutely, and that conversation even starts with first, and while you're thinking about those mission, vision, and values, so that you can hire according to that. It also starts with really figuring out who you actually do truly need. Who should that first hire be, or that next hire be? So we may think, oh, I know I need a salesperson, or I really need an assistant that can come and help me, or I need a marketing person, or we may have something in mind, and maybe that's correct, but taking a step back, and again, the SBDC can certainly help with this, taking a step back and saying, really, where are we going, and what do I really need to get there, step by step, and then also looking at, budget-wise, can I afford that person, and those kinds of things. Those are all conversations that we can have with you, and would probably be the best starting point. Anything else you ladies would add to that?
No, I think you both said it all. I'm going to just throw out a resource when thinking about what Elly started with, which was who are you? Because you attract who you are, right? So I think that's such a beautiful point to make. And one tool I work with teams is Traction. That's a book written by Gino Wickman, and you can get sort of a free copy. You can download or listen to an audiobook, and there's a lot of resources on YouTube if you wanted to look into it. And that will kind of walk you through the process if you're not certain of, who are you and how you would define it to someone coming into the organization. I think that it's a great tool. So I just want to throw that tool out there, and not to dissuade you from calling and using us, because we can certainly help you as well. But I think that's a great tool.
Can you repeat the name of that book and author?
Sure, Traction, so Traction, Traction, and the author is Gino, so it's with a G, Gino Wickman.
Awesome.
Okay, well, it is just after 11 o'clock, and that looks like all the questions we have. Would you ladies like to address anything else before we close out the webinar?
I don't think so. I think we're set.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you again for coming in today. And if you would like to schedule a meeting with a consultant, please feel free to visit our website at www.sbdcorlando.com/consulting to schedule an appointment. Be on the lookout for that evaluation survey, and we hope to see you virtually or in person soon. Thank you again for everyone for coming, and we'll just say goodbye.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.